Thomas Whitmore sat in the elegant restaurant on the 42nd floor, the city sprawling beneath him like a kingdom he'd conquered. At 63, he'd built empires, demolished competitors, and amassed more wealth than most could imagine. His guest, Richard Chun, laughed too loudly at every comment Thomas made. That was the problem with success. Everyone became an echo. "Another bottle of the 2005 Bordeaux," Thomas called out, barely glancing up. The young woman who approached their table moved with quiet grace. Her uniform was crisp, her dark hair pulled back neatly. She couldn't have been more than 25. Her name tag read Elena. "Right away, sir," she said softly. Thomas leaned back in his chair, a mischievous glint in his eye. Richard was droning on about quarterly projections, and Thomas needed entertainment. "Wait," Thomas said, louder than necessary. "Before you go, I have a question." Elena paused, turning back with professional courtesy. "You see, my friend here and I manage substantial portfolios," Thomas continued, his voice carrying that edge of mockery he perfected over decades. "We're considering where to invest next. What would you suggest? Where should a couple of old businessmen put their money?" Richard chuckled uncomfortably. A few nearby tables glanced over. Elena stood very still. For a moment, Thomas expected her to stammer, to make excuses, to scurry away embarrassed. That was the point, wasn't it? A moment of cruel amusement to break the monotony. But Elena didn't leave. She met his eyes with steadiness that surprised him. "May I speak honestly, sir?" Thomas waved his hand magnanimously. "By all means. Invest it in people you've overlooked," she said quietly. "That's where the real return is." The words landed differently than Thomas expected. Richard stopped mid-sip. Thomas found himself leaning forward. "Overlooked? What do you mean?" Elena's voice remained gentle but firm. "I mean the people who serve your coffee, who clean your offices, who raise your children while you're in meetings. You asked where to invest. That's my answer." Thomas felt something shift in his chest. Irritation, maybe, or was it shame? "That's not exactly a stock tip," he said, his tone sharper. "You didn't ask for a stock tip," Elena replied. "You asked for advice." She excused herself and walked toward the bar. Thomas watched her go, an unfamiliar feeling settling over him. Richard tried to restart their conversation, but Thomas wasn't listening anymore. He thought about his daughter, Jessica. She was Elena's age once, before the arguments, before she stopped returning his calls. She'd told him, during their last conversation 3 years ago, that he'd never seen her, really seen her. He'd dismissed it as youthful melodrama. Thomas called Elena back over, before she could disappear into the kitchen. "Sit," he said, then caught himself. "Would you sit? Please, just for a moment." Elena glanced at her manager, who nodded hesitantly. She sat at the edge of the chair. "Why did you say that?" Thomas asked, and this time there was no mockery in his voice. Elena folded her hands in her lap. "My mother cleaned houses for 30 years. She raised 3 of us alone after my father died. Every home she cleaned belonged to people like you. Successful, powerful, and most of them never learned her name." Thomas swallowed. And she died last year, at her funeral. Do you know who came? Her clients. Not because they had to, but because over 30 years, she'd listened to their troubles, celebrated their children's graduations, mourned their losses. She invested in them, and they remembered. The restaurant sounds faded. Thomas saw his own mother, who'd worked as a seamstress to put him through college. When had he last visited her grave? 2 years? 3? "I'm sorry about your mother," Thomas said, and meant it. Elena's eyes glistened, but she smiled. "She taught me that wealth isn't what you accumulate. It's what you give away that defines you." Thomas sat back. He thought of all his achievements, mounted and framed in his office. He thought of his empty penthouse. He thought of Jessica. "I have a daughter," Thomas heard himself say. "I haven't spoken to her in 3 years. "Why not?" Elena asked simply. "Pride. Stubbornness. The same traits that made me successful, I suppose." "Those traits built your empire," Elena said gently. "But they don't build a family." Richard had grown very quiet. Thomas realized his friend was watching him with something that looked like recognition. Thomas reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. Jessica's contact photo looked back at him. She was smiling, 20 years younger in the picture. "It's been so long," Thomas said. "What would I even say?" "The truth," Elena said. "That you're sorry. That you want to try again. That's all anyone really wants. To be seen. To matter." Thomas felt his throat tighten. When had he become this man? So successful and so alone? He looked at Elena. "You're very wise for someone so young." "I had a good teacher," she said, standing. "Now I really should get back to work." "Wait." Thomas pulled out his wallet, then stopped. He realized money wasn't what this moment needed. "Thank you," he said instead, "for your honesty, for your time, for seeing me as more than just a customer." Elena smiled, and it reached her eyes. "We all deserve to be seen, Mr. Whitmore, even billionaires." After she left, Thomas stared at his phone for a long moment. Then he typed a message to Jessica. "I know it's been too long. I know I have a lot to answer for, but I miss you, and I'd like to try again, if you'll let me." He hit send before he could overthink it. Richard cleared his throat. That was unexpected. Thomas looked at his old friend. "When did we become so small, Richard? So focused on winning that we forgot why we were playing?" Richard had no answer. 3 weeks later, Thomas sat in a different restaurant. More modest, better light. Jessica sat across from him, cautious but present. "I want to hear about your life," Thomas said. "Really hear it. No interruptions. No advice. Just listening." Jessica's eyes widened slightly. Then she began to talk. And Thomas discovered that listening was harder than any negotiation he'd ever navigated, but was also the most worthwhile investment he'd ever made. He never forgot Elena's words. He never forgot the lesson she taught him that day in the restaurant on the 42nd floor. That the best returns come from investing in people, not portfolios. That wisdom often comes from unexpected places. And that it's never too late to start seeing the people around you. Really seeing them. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales of wisdom and second chances. Leave a comment below about a time when unexpected advice changed your perspective. Your story might inspire someone else today. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.